It's the question we'd all like the answer to. Has Schapelle Corby really lost her marbles, or is it just an act to try and scam an early release from an Indonesian prison? She's been there now for 5 years after being convicted of importing marijuana. As you've probably heard, a leading Sydney psychiatrist says Schapelle's lost her mind. Jonathan Phillips says she's clinically insane and is calling for her to be transferred to an Australian jail and treated. In a moment, we'll hear from a campaigner for her freedom who spent time with Schapelle at the prison and is still close to her family. But first, this backgrounder from Sonia Voigt.
5 long years in a crowded, dirty cell are taking their toll. Schapelle Corby's reportedly losing her mind.
She feels useless, she feels alienated, she feels removed from the rest of humanity.
She's reportedly witnessed suicides and bashings and has reverted to speaking in baby voices. Australian psychiatrist Dr. Jonathan Phillips spent a week with Schapelle. He says she's hallucinating and must be transferred to a prison in Australia and treated in a secure hospital.
She is in a situation where she could easily move forward to kill herself.
The nightmare began when the Gold Coast beauty student was found to be carrying 4.1 kilograms of marijuana. Schapelle Corby has always maintained her innocence, but Indonesian courts didn't buy her story.
They followed me!
I've been sentenced to 20 years. I'll be out when I'm 47, and I didn't do it, and I don't know why this is happening. And I just need someone to come and help me to get me out of here. I've had enough of being in here.
Despite early supporters vowing to secure her freedom,
but we'll get her out of there. It's the last thing we do is going to get her out of there.
Real help hasn't arrived, and her cause has at times been hindered by members of her own family. 2 half-brothers and her late father all have drug convictions back in Australia. And she was supposedly photographed enjoying dinner with her sister Mercedes outside the jail last year. Images that beg the question whether Schapelle's reported madness is really a desperate bid to get out of jail and back to Australia.
A short time ago, I spoke to Tony Wilson. He's a Gold Coast journalist who's covered the Corby saga from the beginning and written a book about the case. He's visited Schapelle in prison and is in close contact with her mother, Rosalie. And I asked him, how is Schapelle's mum coping?
Well, she's all manner of emotions. She's been very upset, very dismayed, but at the moment, right as we speak this day, she's very angry because the doctor at Schapelle Prison in Bali has come out and told the media this morning that there's very little wrong with Schapelle Corby at all, and Rosalie's just reminded me that he's the same doctor that writes her scripts, which are then taken to the pharmacy for her antidepressants and whatever else she's on.
You've been over there, you've seen her there, you've seen the conditions. How bad is it?
It's nothing like an Australian or a New Zealand prison. For a start, there's no food. If you haven't got money or family that are there permanently to look after you and supply you with food and water, you wouldn't survive.
Look, Tony, can I put it to you? I mean, in conditions like that, it'd be perfectly natural for anyone to do or say anything to get out of there.
Yeah, that's true. But in this instant, although there's a percentage of people that think Schapelle's faking it, I wish that was true, actually, because unfortunately she's very, very sick. And her mother has been telling us about it for quite a few months. It's not a new development. She started deteriorating about 15 months ago after the death of her father, Michael, and then news that her last appeal had failed and she knew she had no further hope.
Now, her mother has been over to see her. I mean, from her account, the behaviour was pretty odd.
Yeah, it was. She's regressed to her childhood. Rosalie said sometimes you go into the jail and the old Schapelle greets you, but by the time the visit ends, she's back to being a little girl carrying dolls and speaking in a baby voice and saying, "Mummy, are you here to take me home?" or "Mummy, can I go to the toilet now?" and that sort of thing, which just tears a mother up.
And, of course, her mother has offered, hasn't she, to go over and live at the prison to look after her or even to trade places with her.
That's right. That's a fairly recent development. She's written to the Indonesian authorities making that offer. She knows that it wouldn't be accepted, but it's just the desperate act of a mother who has no other way of helping her beloved daughter.
But you're convinced, as is her mother, that Schapelle is not faking it. She is genuinely suffering some sort of mental breakdown.
Oh, it's a fairly serious mental breakdown. She thinks that there's implants in her teeth that rule what she does. She's torn holes in the wall of the cell because she thinks people are spying on her and photographing her. She climbed an 8-metre water tower because she thought the air would be fresher up there and wouldn't be prison air, and also it might be a means of escape. And she's got in the ceiling cavity of her cell for the same reason, and that's only the mild effects. Many days her sister Mercedes has to come into the cell to wash her and clothe her and feed her, and there are days when she's almost catatonic and doesn't speak.
Tony, obviously she does people like yourself, people who believe in her, people who are supporting her. Ultimately, isn't it going to be a political situation or solution that gets her out?
That's the only way that it can work. The Indonesian government have said they won't grant clemency to drug traffickers, but we've discovered that they have in fact done that, so there is precedent there. And we'd be hoping that our Prime Minister Rudd, if he asked for clemency, would get a favourable hearing, because honestly, if Schapelle doesn't get medical treatment, she won't survive. And it's quite possible that even with really good medical treatment back here in Australia, her condition's irreversible anyway.
You said in your book that Schapelle was going to make a great story because she was good looking.
That's true. That's what piqued the media interest to begin with. Here was this attractive white Australian girl in an Asian jail and an Asian environment, and I'm afraid it appealed to maybe the wrong type of Australian, but it certainly had mass appeal. Unfortunately, she's probably not as attractive as she was. She's certainly aged in the nearly 5 years she's been in there.
Why do you still care?
Because I believe there's a fellow Australian sitting in a horror prison who is innocent and should not be there. And I think that's why it's affected her mentally. The Bali Nine mentally are pretty good because they know they were guilty and were caught red-handed, and they've come to grips with it. Schapelle's never come to grips with the fact that she was innocent, yet she's still locked up and suffering.
Tony, I mean, finally, do you believe she can survive if she's left there?
No. No. And even if she's transferred to an Indonesian psychiatric hospital, they don't really treat the people, they just lock them up. So she'd just be replacing one prison with another, really. She has to go somewhere where she can get proper treatment. And even then, as I said, it may be too late.
Tony Wilson, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.